The psychological mechanism that keeps a gambler pulling the lever on a slot machine is the exact same tactic a toxic person uses to keep you trapped in a trauma bond. In the next 10 minutes, you will understand the exact neuroscience behind why this happens. You are not staying because you lack willpower, you are neurochemically captive. And there is a systematic framework to break the loop permanently. To understand why your mind craves the approval of someone who treats you poorly, we must look at the foundational principles of behavioral conditioning. This analysis draws strictly from empirical behavioral psychology and neuroscientific literature to cut through the pop psychology misconceptions surrounding trauma bonds. In the mid-20th century, behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner conducted a series of landmark experiments on animal behavior. Skinner placed subjects inside controlled environments, now known as Skinner boxes, to study how reward schedules alter behavior. In the first scenario, the subject received a pellet of food every single time they pressed a lever. This is a continuous reinforcement schedule. The subject pressed the lever only when hungry and stopped when satisfied. In the second scenario, Skinner altered the mechanism. The lever became completely unpredictable. Sometimes it took 2 presses to get a pellet, sometimes 20, and sometimes none at all. This is a variable ratio schedule, or intermittent reinforcement. The result was startling. The subjects did not give up. Instead, they became entirely obsessed. They pressed the lever compulsively until they reached physical exhaustion. Unpredictability did not extinguish the behavior. It magnified it to the point of addiction. If this framework is clarifying something you have experienced, subscribe to the Shadow Protocol and hit like. New clinical analysis every week. Now, let us examine the neurochemistry. Modern neuroscience reveals that human beings respond to this exact same mechanical loop. The primary chemical engine behind this obsession is dopamine. A common misconception is that dopamine is the chemical of pleasure. It is not. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of anticipation, but the trigger is not certainty. It is uncertainty. Dopamine spikes most powerfully not when a reward arrives as expected, but when your brain cannot determine whether it will arrive at all. Certainty produces a flat, stable neurochemical baseline. Uncertainty amplifies the response exponentially. When a partner or an employer is consistently kind and reliable, your dopamine levels remain stable and healthy. Your nervous system feels safe. But when a manipulator introduces an erratic cycle, where they treat you with profound affection one week and ice you out with cold silence the next, they trigger a massive neurochemical shift. Because the reward is unpredictable, your brain enters a hyper-focused state of alert. The drop-off in affection creates a state of intense psychological deficit. When the manipulator finally grants you a crumb of validation, a kind text, or a sudden apology, your brain floods your system with a massive spike of dopamine. This surge feels like profound relief, or even deep spiritual love. But clinically, it is simply your brain recovering from a state of forced neurochemical starvation. The manipulator has successfully transformed themselves into the single source of your stabilization. The dopamine engine explains the craving, but the structural cage it builds over time, the trauma bond, is a separate and more durable mechanism that requires its own analysis. Subscribe to the Shadow Protocol and hit like to help this analysis reach others. We deliver structured clinical deconstructions every week to help you decode manipulative behavior and protect your autonomy. Let us return to the analysis. Over an extended timeline, intermittent reinforcement shifts from a behavioral quirk into a structural cage known as a trauma bond. Foundational psychological evaluations of abusive dynamics show that intense emotional bonds develop specifically out of power imbalances and intermittent cycles of abuse and warmth. The trauma bond is forged in the volatile space between 2 powerful chemicals, cortisol and dopamine. When a manipulator devalues you, ignores your boundaries, or withdraws their affection without warning, your body enters a state of chronic stress. Your adrenal system floods your bloodstream with cortisol, the stress hormone. Your heart rate increases, your anxiety spikes, and you enter survival mode. In a healthy relationship, you would address the issue or leave. But inside an intermittent schedule, your brain remembers the intense high of the previous reward phase. You become hyper-vigilant, scanning the manipulator's behavior for any sign that the good version of them is about to return. When they finally shift back into the warm phase, the sudden drop in cortisol, combined with the immediate explosion of dopamine, creates an incredibly potent neurological anchor. Your brain pairs the relief of safety with the exact person who caused the danger. This loop overrides your logical, critical thinking. You stop looking at their behavior objectively. Instead, you become an addict, entirely willing to endure prolonged periods of psychological pain just to experience that single, unpredictable moment of relief. Before we move to the operational defense frameworks required to extract yourself from this biological trap, you must learn to identify the subtle ways intermittent reinforcement manifests outside of romantic dynamics. It is actively utilized in corporate structures and professional settings to extract uncompensated labor from high-performing individuals. Pay close attention to this operational blueprint. In the professional world, highly manipulative managers and organizations use intermittent reinforcement to keep employees producing maximum output for minimum reward. It frequently manifests as the dangling carrot. A supervisor will praise your work enthusiastically, hinting at an impending promotion, a significant raise, or a premier assignment. They make you feel like an invaluable asset to the firm. But the moment you request a concrete timeline or formal paperwork, the schedule shifts. Suddenly, the manager becomes distant, critical, or introduces a shifting set of metrics you must achieve. They claim that the budget is tight right now, or that you need to prove your leadership capacity just a little bit longer. Just as you begin to disengage, update your resume, or lower your productivity, the supervisor pulls the lever again. They surprise you with a small crumb of validation, a public shout-out in a meeting, a casual lunch invite, or a minor title adjustment without a salary increase. Your brain experiences that familiar relief. You think, they finally see my value. I just need to work harder. This is corporate operant conditioning. They are feeding you just enough crumbs to prevent you from leaving, while ensuring you remain desperate enough to continue overperforming for free. Underneath the professional setting, the identical cortisol-dopamine cycle is running, converting workplace exploitation into a biological compulsion. Now you understand how the trap is built. The final section gives you the exact structural tools to dismantle it, starting with your own data. Extracting yourself from an intermittent reinforcement schedule cannot be done through emotional processing or conversational negotiation. You cannot reason with a slot machine. You must use raw data and structural boundaries to reclaim your neurochemical equilibrium. 1. Quantify the trend line. A manipulator relies on your memory being distorted by the dopamine highs. To defeat this, you must look at objective data. Create a private digital spreadsheet. Every single day, log the interpersonal climate of your relationship or workplace on a scale of -5 to +5. -5 represents cold silence, insults, or severe anxiety. +5 represents genuine safety, open communication, and respect. Run this log for exactly 30 days. At the end of the month, plot these daily scores as a line chart to visualize the full trend line. The resulting trajectory will likely shock you. You will see brief, isolated spikes of warmth surrounded by vast, prolonged wastelands of devaluation. You can no longer lie to yourself with hope. The data proves the reality. 2. Devalue the crumbs. Train your brain to recognize occasional kindness, not as a sign of genuine transformation, but as a tactical preservation mechanism. When a toxic partner suddenly buys you flowers after 2 weeks of cold silence, or a toxic boss offers a compliment after months of neglect, stop viewing it as a reward. Look at it analytically. Say to yourself, this is a maintenance dose. This is the minimum amount of food required to keep the lab rat inside the box. By recontextualizing the gift as a control mechanism, you prevent the dopamine spike from hijacking your logic. Once you have labeled the gesture, respond with absolute behavioral neutrality. Do not reward the manipulator with increased engagement, unearned warmth, or elevated productivity. Accept the gesture transactionally and immediately return to your baseline boundary. 3. Implement a fixed ratio exit. You must transition your life off the variable schedule entirely. Since you cannot control the manipulator's output, you must make your own boundaries completely predictable. Decide on a strict, non-negotiable threshold of behavior. For example, if I am subjected to the silent treatment or an unprovoked insult even one more time, the interaction ends permanently. The moment that line is crossed, you do not issue a warning. You do not explain your decision. You execute the exit. You close the office door. You walk out of the house, or you implement the final permanent step. Total no contact. The slot machine only retains its power over you as long as you believe that the next pull of the lever will bring a different result. The moment you look at the data, see the machine for what it is, and walk off the casino floor, you win. When you finally decide to walk away from an intermittent reinforcement schedule, your brain will enter a severe phase of neurochemical withdrawal. It will scream at you to return to the source of the addiction. To survive this crisis point and protect your long-term sanity, you must understand the exact operational protocol of complete separation. Watch our comprehensive guide to the psychology of going no contact right here on